Good morning, students. This is a follow-up of our last lesson, which was sort of introducing what we're going to be doing in our essays. Hopefully, you guys are starting to work on that, and I'm going to explain what does your first paragraph look like, or what should it look like. Because I said I want at least 3 points of evidence, it would make the most sense for you to have every paragraph that's sort of a different part of the book, or using different resources. So what I'm going to go through here is I'm going to quickly just review what we've talked about yesterday, and then give you an example paragraph of what mine looks like, and sort of highlighting the important features of it. So this is all about how Brian survived, and it's our essay on Brian's success in Hatchet. So again, let's just repeat ourselves. What is a thesis? Because the entire purpose of an essay is to argue a thesis, is to prove a thesis or defend a thesis. And a thesis is the turning point, or the thesis for us is the turning point in the story where Brian decided a course of action that significantly impacted his chances for survival. You're going to be describing what led up to Brian making that decision, and then also how it affected him as the book continues. And you're using evidence from the story and from articles like Survival by Numbers or other ones that you can find that are about surviving in the wild. Okay? You should be finding quotes from both articles and from the book, and I'm going to show you today how I want your quotes to be written. Okay? It will be fairly simple and straightforward, but it's a good thing to know how to do. So our thesis, or my thesis for my example, is Brian's decision to make a smaller pond to trap and keep fish alive near his shelter allowed Brian to be less worried about his food and spend more time dealing with his bigger problems, like how he was going to eventually get rescued. Now, that's a run-on sentence, so I could probably do some work on how I write that, but that's still a good start. If Brian hadn't made that smaller pond, he would have potentially died. Okay, so how am I going to argue that? My first evidence is from the book, and this is from our last one too, and it says, at the beginning of the book, Brian suffered immensely from not having enough food. On page 55, it says he would have to find something to eat before he did anything else. He would have to find something to eat. Okay? And how do I explain this one? Well, this is sort of imagine this is sort of my step-by-step process. I find evidence, and then I jot down some notes. And then I'm going to write a paragraph after that's maybe a combination of these two things. So you can see from this quote that Brian was struggling greatly from not having enough food to eat. He was very weak at this time, and if he didn't find something soon, he wouldn't be able to care for himself. Okay, so now I've taken those two ideas and I've combined them into a paragraph. And here's my paragraph. Food was an extremely important resource that Brian needed to survive. When the plane first crashed, Brian was in rough shape, and he needed time to recover some of his strength. One of the first things he noticed after the crash was how hungry he was. Now with the thought of the burger, the emptiness roared at him. He could not believe the hunger, had never felt it this way. The lake water had filled his stomach, but it left him hungry, and now it demanded food, screamed for food. And then page 45. As Brian began to walk around the forest and get more comfortable in his surroundings, the struggle to find food was made very clear to him. On page 55, it says he would have to find something to eat before he did anything else. He would have to find something to eat. Later on in the book, Brian built himself a small fish pond, which allowed him to catch and eat fish to his leisure. If Brian had thought of this earlier in the book, he could have saved himself some pain and struggles. Food was the most important thing that Brian had to pay attention to in the woods. So that's an entire paragraph. That's sort of summarizing what led up to him making the decision to build himself this fish pond, and me sort of trying to argue the point that it was very important for his survival that he did sort of deal with his food problem. Now, I added a quote in here, and I have a reason for all these colors. So the very first line of my paragraph is my topic sentence, or my introductory sentence, and this is the sentence that tells me, the reader, and anyone that's doing any work with this, that this is what I'm trying to argue in this sentence specifically. Food was an extremely important resource that Brian needed to survive. Okay, so that's the point I'm trying to argue. Now, the second yellow line at the very bottom, that's my concluding sentence. And that is telling me this is the thing that I argued. This was the idea I was trying to pay attention to. And it said food was the most important thing that Brian had to pay attention to in the woods. So those two sentences work together in tandem. The first one introduces the idea. The second one concludes that I've argued that idea. Okay, now what's happening in the middle? Well, I have this pink text with green outline. So the pink text is specific quotes, and you'll notice that I have quotations around it. That's very important. If you have any sort of quotes from books or articles, you should have quotation marks. But in green, I specifically say where I find that information. So I found the first quote on page 45, and on the second quote, I found it on page 55. Now, you notice how I did two different methods of describing where I found it from. If it works, you can say in Hatchet on page blah blah blah, it says, and then do your quote, which is my second example. If that doesn't fit nicely into your paragraph, the other method you could have is just using brackets, and that's essentially telling the reader, hey, just so you know, you need some extra information, and here's the extra information. Okay, you find that on page 45. I don't need to say, like for the brackets part, I don't need to say in the brackets, Hatchet, page 45, paragraph 3, line 2. I don't need to be that detailed. I just want you to tell me what page number you found your quote on. If you find a quote from an article or something like that, all you would need to do is just do it in brackets and say survival by numbers. That'd be fine. Or you can even say survival by numbers .2. That'd be nice too. Okay? But this is what my paragraph looked like, and this is me trying to support my ideas. Now, when I originally created this, I had about 5 supporting paragraphs, or I had 5 supporting ideas. That means every single one of my paragraphs are going to look something similar to this. I need to have a quote, and I need to explain my quote. It's not good enough to just have the quote. I can't just have a quote and say, okay, well, the reader understands what I'm trying to say. It's really important for me to sort of take a step back and explain what do I think this quote's saying, or why is it important. Okay, so this is what you should be working on today, that you should be gathering your supporting paragraphs. I did my very first paragraph on before the event. I think it would be good for you to do that too. Your second paragraph could be during the event, whatever decision he makes, and explaining what his reasoning was. And the third paragraph would make sense to have, okay, now that the thing has been done, what's the result of that? And finding evidence in the book later on that says, oh, he's using this now to his benefit. Okay, so that's sort of how I would break it down, 1, 2, 3. And there's more information you can get to, but that's just a simple way of looking at it. First paragraph is sort of before he makes a decision, what's happening. Second paragraph is why he makes the decision at the time. And the third paragraph is how that affects him in the future. I hope this is helpful, and I hope you all watch this video.